Brian in Pittsburgh, Massachusetts. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm so excited. I heard Donald Trump speak. It's the first time I've ever heard anybody tell stuff the way it should be told. He's the only one that's sticking up for the blue-collar worker. China's been ripping us off like crazy, and nobody's ever said nothing. All the Democrats are all for letting millions of illegals in the country, millions of people on visas. They don't stick up for the blue-collar worker. Clinton deregulated the banks. That caused everybody to go broke. I can't believe anybody would even think of voting for her. I'm so excited that Donald Trump is running.
Okay, Brian, I got it. And I'm excited that he's running too. I don't disagree that Donald Trump is actually saying populist stuff. I mean, here's what's going on. On the left, the populist is Bernie Sanders. He's talking about what the average man on the street is concerned about. On the right, the populist right now looks like it's Donald Trump. And that's going to make a lot of Republicans very uncomfortable, particularly if he makes it into the debates. One of the biggest lessons, I mentioned this yesterday, I'll probably mention it, many times again, but it was really surprising to me. When I first moved to Washington, D.C. 5 years ago and started doing the show from here, because we started it in Vermont, and then we moved to Portland, Oregon, and we did it there for 5 years, and then we moved here. We did it for 3 years in Vermont. When I moved here, I remember several different people, by way of kind of welcoming me, people who had been on my show in the past. I'm talking about members of Congress, members of the media, whose names you would recognize, invited me to dinner parties at their homes here in Washington, D.C., invited Louise and I over, and with some really rather startlingly high-profile guests, people who you would immediately recognize from television or politicians whose names you'd know, and would ask me questions about my position on issues and just try to, and at the time I was trying to figure out what they were trying to figure out about me. And after the first month or so, after we moved here, all those invitations just evaporated. I haven't been invited to any of the parties. I haven't been invited to any of the events, period. And I'm not complaining about that. I frankly would probably turn them down anyway. But my point is that what I discovered from that experience is it's not Democrats versus Republicans. This is apropos of the caller who was just calling in support of Donald Trump. It's insiders versus outsiders. And the questions that those folks were asking me at those early dinner parties that I was invited to by members of the media, I'm talking about media TV stars, and by members of Congress, and I'm talking about, Democrats. The real question they were asking me is, are you an insider or an outsider? Now that I look back on it in retrospect, it took me a year to figure this out, of living in this town. Because I figured you could move back and forth between inside and outside. You can't. Once you're labeled an outsider, you're out. Once you're labeled an insider, you're in. This is the problem. Frankly, I believe that Cenk Uygur, and I've never had a conversation with him about this, so he may disagree with me, but had when he was at MSNBC. He kept going off on issues that didn't please the insiders. And network television is all about insiders. You very rarely ever see outsiders. Bernie Sanders is the outsider on the left. Donald Trump is the outsider on the right. And I think that this election that's coming up is going to be about the insiders versus the outsiders. I think that what's going on is that the people of America, and I think this is what animated the Tea Party movement, aside from the millions of dollars from the Koch brothers, who themselves were outsiders until just very recently, and now they've done basically a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. Now the insiders are coming to them on bended knee and kissing their rings. Right? So they've become the rulers of the insiders. But they used to be the outsiders. And I don't have the kind of money or power to bend people to my will. And but I'm telling you, that's what it's about. And I have a very strong feeling. This, every 80 years we reboot this country. 80 years ago it was FDR. 80 years before that, it was Abraham Lincoln. 80 years before that, it was the American Revolution. I think this is going to be an election in which the base on both sides is going to, depending on the candidates, is going to turn out in big numbers and vote for outsiders, which is why I think that Bernie Sanders actually has a chance to win not just the nomination, the Democratic nomination, but win the White House. I mean, I've seen this. I lived in Vermont for 10 years. Republicans love Bernie Sanders in Vermont. He 73 or 74% of the vote. He won in the last election against a very well-funded Republican who threw $5 million into the, which is huge in a state with only 600,000 people. Buying all kinds of television ads. Bernie did not run one single television ad. The press didn't like him. The press doesn't like him. He's an outsider. He doesn't throw money at them. So